Okay, good afternoon. We're calling the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting to order for Wednesday, November 17th at 4 o'clock. Could we all rise for the pledge, please? Ready? Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Thank you very much. Ms. McGill, would you please call roll? Here.
Burns.
Here.
K-Spear.
Here.
Ferrara.
Here.
Jacobson. Here. Longstreet.
Here.
Larimore Hall and intern Torres Santos are not present.
Thank you, Ms. McGill. Ms. Rapp, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you. Any written communications?
Not that were included with your packet
Okay.
that I know of.
Thank you very much. Public comment, is anyone here to address an issue that's not on the agenda? Okay. You're allowed to for up to 1 minute, but seeing that there's no one here for public comment, we will close public comment. We're going to skip community service recognition, and we'll move on to Commissioner Committee assignment reports. And we'll start with Ms. Jacobson.
I have nothing to report this month and look forward to next month.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. K-Spear?
Both my committee meetings were canceled, so I have nothing to report.
Okay. Mr. Ferrara?
I have nothing to report on the IPM committee meeting at this time. We're still waiting for that.
Thank you. Ms. Longstreet?
Today, Mr. Burns and I attended the Park Foundation meeting, and we have sent out our solicitation letter, and we hope everyone will respond who can to help the Park Foundation support park and recreation services in the community.
Great. Thank you.
And
My name is Scott Burns. BB and I were also at the Front Country Trails Task Force public workshop meeting a couple of weekends ago at Louise Lowry Davis Center from 9 till 11 in the morning. On a Saturday, we had presentations on ways different communities handle trails issues, and find that it really doesn't matter where we're at. Every community seems to have issues with the different people, whether it's people that are only on bikes saying that other people on bikes are riding too fast, or if people are walking, then there's people on bikes riding too fast or on horseback. So it was an interesting presentation, and at the Front Country Trails Task Force meeting, which will be, I think, December 1st, but December 1st, we'll look at it and come up with some possible solutions. And hopefully someone's going to talk about the Mr. Browning's on Wednesday last week, or Tuesday.
About
yes, I attended on Tuesday. Ms. Wiscombe and I both attended.
Yes.
Senior moments are happening right here. The training for property owners and tree professionals on the city ordinances, and Mr. Downey did a presentation on the current city ordinances and the different governing bodies that regulate trees in the community. It was very informative and well attended, and I would like to thank him for that workshop. I know there's another one tomorrow morning from 7:30 to 9:30 at the Gebhardt Room, and I encourage gardeners, property owners, and tree professionals to go to it. It was very good. And just a correction, I was not at the Front Country Trails workshop. I can't take credit for that. I was out that week.
Okay. Thank you very much. If you want to attend the tree ordinance training seminar, I'll give you Mr. Downey's phone number because it's by reservation, 564-5433, and it's limited to 60 people. I hope there's still some spaces available. Great, there are. Okay. So please do consider attending. It was really a great seminar, and I think very valuable to the to not only citizens but to the tree professionals, tree care professionals, and landscapers in our community. Okay, on Thursday, the 4th of November, I attended the regular Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting. Mr. Downey reported on the status of violations, and we made our normal site visits for the applications before the Commission today. On Wednesday, November 10th, I attended the Golf Advisory Committee. There we heard the rounds and financial report. Rounds are okay, but revenues are struggling due to competitions from other courses and, offering specials, et cetera. So we're working hard to improve that. We got a marketing report. There was a big marketing effort for the golf course, various ways to market the course. The website and newsletter are the biggest draws right now to biggest hits to the golf course. There was a survey in the newsletter, and apparently that was very well received. They so far have about 120 some odd responses to the survey, so that's really great. And the golf course is working very hard with the local hotels and inns and motels to promote what I'll term a stay and play and playing at the Santa Barbara Golf Club. So we also heard a golf maintenance report, nothing out of the ordinary there, and the Golf Pro report, again, with the marketing efforts continuing and also promotion of more tournaments at the course. So we hope we're heading in the right direction there. And on the 6th and the 13th of November, I attended workshops at the Louise Lowry Davis Center. These workshops were in conjunction, Master Gardeners of Santa Barbara under UC Cooperative Extension and Parks Department were the co-hosts of the workshops for sustainable landscapes. And we had great turnout from local master gardeners. These were not only educational pieces, but they were also implementing a sustainable landscape at the Louise Lowry Davis Center. So I encourage you all to go over there and take a look at it. It's not totally installed yet, but it's getting there. So I think that's it for that. Okay, and now we move on to commission and staff communications.
I don't have anything,
Okay,
Chair
thank you, Ms. Rapp. We'll skip the Youth Council report and move on to the consent calendar. First item is the summary of council actions for information. Ms. Rapp, do you have any comments on that, or it's in our packet? So
It's in your packet, and the two items which I believe you are already familiar with is the purchase of a property on Las Positas near Cliff Drive by the Creeks Program for a creek restoration project, and also council approved the Neighborhood Advisory Council as recommended by the Park and Recreation Commission. So we are moving straight ahead with doing the recruitment in the community for those positions.
great to hear that. That's really an exciting thing that's happening.
I have a question.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. K-Spear. Yes.
Ms. Rapp, on the neighborhood advisory councils, the existing ones, or now I guess, are they no longer meeting? Like the Lower West Side and the Franklin and...
Yeah, Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner K-Spear, those groups are not officially disbanded until the Neighborhood Advisory Council begins its meetings. So we will continue to meet until that time.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have a question or anything? Okay. Great. Now we're on to the approval of the minutes. We have minutes from the 20th of October, 2010. That was a special meeting. And we have minutes from the regular meeting on October 27th. Is anyone want to take these separately or together? Anyone? Okay.
I would move approval of the minutes of October 20th and 27th.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And it passes unanimously. Now we move on to Street Tree Advisory Committee items. And we have 2 items on the list. First one is at street tree removal request at 535 East Montecito Street. Mr. Downey?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners, before I get to that, I'd like to mention that there really isn't any time left to reserve your spot. We have room for walk-ins at the meeting tomorrow morning.
Great.
No need to call to reserve. If you want to come, show up, and we'll do our best to accommodate you.
Yeah, sorry. That was kind of, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the meeting starts at 7:30. You don't want to take calls at midnight, Tim?
Well, I won't be there to answer. So. Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners, the first item is 535 East Montecito Street. The Santa Barbara Housing Authority is proposing a project to put some low-income housing on this parcel. As part of that project, they're proposing to remove the jacaranda you see in the photo for a driveway entrance that's being proposed. And along the Calle Cesar Chavez side of the property, they're proposing to remove all the trees. One of those is weeping bottlebrush, and the remainder are lemon bottlebrush. The Street Advisory Committee reviewed that and determined that because the property is going to be improving the parkway to make a larger parkway than space is for the individual tree wells now, they determined that there would be space for larger trees than are currently designated out there. The designated tree is Magnolia Little Jim. The committee determined that it might be important to go through the process to change the designation before a decision is made on the removals, and their recommendation is to postpone a decision to allow them opportunity to change the designation along Calle Cesar Chavez Street.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Downey. Before we open it up for public comment, I just have a clarifying question that I'd like to ask. Is it possible for the Commission to approve the removal with the stipulation that the trees on Calle Cesar Chavez will be replaced with the newly designated tree in a size and quantity to be determined by staff?
Chair Wiscombe, in order to change the designation, this commission has to have that on their agenda, and you have the authority to do that. Staff does not. So that will have to be an item that is dealt with later. However, if the commission desires to approve or rule on the trees at this point and request that the Street Advisory Committee review the designation later, that's certainly possible.
But I guess what I'm asking is, I know that the new designation comes back to the Commission, but is it possible for us to approve the removal and require street trees along that street that are obviously going to be a different designation than what they are now with the parkway widening, and then with the stipulation that staff can actually determine the size and the quantity?
Yes, Chair Wiscombe.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. Okay, does anyone else have any clarifying questions on this? Okay, I'm going to open this up for public comment. We have 2 speaker slips on this. The first speaker will be Mr. Reynolds. Yep, okay, and then followed by Ms. Miller. Okay, Mr. Reynolds, welcome. Oh, sorry.
Good evening, Honorable Chair and Commissioners. Just on a personal note, this is actually I've been in my professional career for almost 19 years, and I actually started out in recreation. This is the first time in 19 years since I left recreation that I've got to appear before a Parks and Rec Commission, and so I'm pretty excited about being back. It's the funnest job I ever had, and I regret leaving every day since then.
Well, yeah,
thank
welcome
you.
back, yes.
So it's nice to be here. So my name is Bill McReynolds. I am the project manager for City Ventures. We're the builder of the community that Mr. Downey described, and I'd like to thank Mr. Downey for his assistance during this process. He's been very communicative and very helpful in this process, and it's been very refreshing. So I just wanted to say you have a great staff working with you guys. Ms. Courtney Miller will hear. We were open to, we received the recommendation from the Street Tree Committee. We understand that they would like to change the designation of the street tree along Calais Caesar Chavez. We are more than willing to comply with the request. We did revise the landscape plan to reflect what we believe the recommendation would be regarding the larger magnolia tree. It's Latin. Mr. Downey's helped me pronounce it a couple times, but I'm not going to attempt my Latin today. But we would be more than we're more than happy and willing to comply with the committee's request and the commission's approval of changing out the tree to support the larger species of tree. And just as a kind of a FYI, this community actually is going to be a LEED Platinum certified, which will be one of the first in the nation for this.
It's going to be the largest in the nation.
It's going to be the
too,
largest for this
yeah,
designation.
It's a pretty
yes.
exciting project. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and Ms. Miller?
Well, I brought some plans for you, but I think you pretty much already said that we could, we have the potential. There's 10 copies of each. So
Well,
I think you already had stated that there's a potential for you to approve the removals without knowing what the designation for the new tree is yet. So basically what I've brought you here is our revised tree protection plan, which shows what we would recommend for that street tree, as well as a small printout just explaining the 3 different options that we've selected, and I've communicated to Tim just so that you are aware of what they are and can see what they look like and just have a better understanding of it.
great. Okay.
So we'd like to ask if you would approve the removals, if that's possible. Otherwise, that's pretty much all we have to say is just take a look at the trees, and our recommendation is the Magnolia grandiflora Samuel Summers, which is the Latin name. And as Tim mentioned, the designated tree is Magnolia grandiflora Little Gem,
Right.
which is more narrow, smaller tree. And I understand the Street Tree Committee is looking for something with a broader canopy. So that's why we're recommending the Magnolia grandiflora. So,
Okay.
and I think that's it. So,
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We appreciate your coming, and we appreciate your comments, and it is a great project. So, okay, I'm going to close public comment right now and open it up to the commission for discussion. Mr. Burns?
Actually, what I would like to have a little more of a presentation from, just that when I saw our agenda, it said postponed, so I didn't think we were going to talk about this. So I didn't spend a lot of time. So could you kind of give a brief overview of the trees that are going out?
sure.
And then I realize that we will, at a later date, do a formal approval of the trees that are going in if we actually remove this.
Okay, so what you have there is our tree protection plan. And as you'll see on Calle Cesar Chavez, it's on the right side of the sheet. There are a number of existing callistemon, and that's what's shown both on the first page of the smaller printout as well as up on the screen here. So those are our existing trees which we're requesting the removal of. And on the following page of the small printout, we are showing just, further down the street what those little gem magnolias look like, just for context. And on the third sheet, we're showing what we would like to recommend to the Street Tree Committee as well as the Parks and Rec Commission for the street tree to replace the callistemon.
And that's the revised larger one.
Correct. So what's existing now as the designation is a smaller version of this tree. And what the Street Tree Committee would like to see is something with a larger canopy, such as this. The last two pages, Quercus virginiana, as well as the Ulmus parvifolia, those are two other recommendations that we'd like to make. We feel that they both have, the evergreen broad canopy that the Street Tree Committee is looking for. And we'd be happy with those as well. We just, thought we'd call out the magnolia as our preferred recommendation. And then the tree protection plan, I've revised it to show the magnolias as replacing the callistemon. But again, that'll be up to yourselves as well as the Street Tree Committee.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
There other questions and comments? Yes, Mr. Ferrara.
Are you planning on beginning this project within the next 30 to 60 days?
Yes.
Want to get started on it right away?
That's partially the reason that we're here.
Yes, and I guess that tree that's going to be where the driveway is going to be important to come out because you'll probably put the driveway in right away. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. Yeah, I can see the logic myself in that and moving forward. Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Jacobson?
I have a question about the two very large palm trees that are coming out.
Sure.
Is there any chance or way we can preserve those?
Well, we were just on site a few minutes ago looking at those trees, and we have plans to remove them because they are, located where buildings and new landscaping will be going. But we had discussed the possibility of contacting some, tree professionals that we know to see if they can be boxed up and sold or used elsewhere within the city. So that is a possibility, yes.
We're trying to save those two trees, and we have been in that process.
Perfect.
Right now, trying to find somebody to, and if anybody's listening, if they want to take them, we'll give them to them.
Like a giant pumpkin.
Yeah.
On that
Yes.
same line, and this is maybe a question Mr. Downey can help with too. The large eucalyptus, there's a real pretty eucalyptus close to the corner, and it says here it's to be removed. Is that not a setback tree, or is this commercial property without a setback, or?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Longstreet, the property is zoned, the zoning it has now and the approved zoning for the future development will have zero setback. There is no setback for this property.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I learned at the class.
Does anyone else have any questions? Or the reason why I asked Mr. Downey that question was really for this is a very important project in the city. I think it's a pretty exciting project, and I think as long as we can work around the logistics of making sure that what comes back to the commission as a recommendation and gets approved by the commission for a new street tree with the widened parkway, that gets implemented, and we're being told that it will, then I think it would probably be a good idea to probably proceed with this. Is anyone
I'm comfortable with the removals at this point, referring it back to the Street Tree Advisory Committee to establish a new street tree designation and bring that back to the commission probably next month. I don't anticipate you'll be replanting for a longer period. So I don't think we're under a huge time crunch in that area, but we don't want to hold up the work on this end. Are we replacing tree per tree? Is that the number, if I'm going to craft a motion?
Well, my point in asking if staff could actually determine the size and quantity of the street trees was that since we don't know what it is yet, I think that's going to weigh into the
I
consideration.
would just like, though, it to have at least a minimum number replacement, tree for
Okay.
tree.
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Longstreet, it really does depend on what species is determined. Their proposal is to provide up to 8 replacement trees, and I think with larger trees, we probably won't even get that many in, but if your motion were to replace with up to 8, I think that would be reasonable and
Okay.
acceptable by the applicant.
Okay. And I just have to say I have complete faith in projects that are done with the Housing Authority. I think we come out better as a community. So I would move that we concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendations for removal. And, well, the 6 were approved for removal.
No, they actually asked that this item be postponed.
I thought they wanted it postponed simply because of the designation, not because of the removal.
They didn't, I don't
Didn't even-
believe they voted on it, did they?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Longstreet, the recommendation from the committee is to postpone a decision.
Okay, well then I will move that we remove the stated trees in the request, that's 6 trees, and refer this item back to the Street Tree Advisory Committee for redesignation of replacement trees up to 8. Is that
The tree on Montecito too.
right? Is that clear enough in there? All right.
Yes, I think,
Second.
okay, any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No, okay. That
And we hope
passes.
to be invited to the
Thank you very
opening of
much.
this project.
Okay. Carla? Okay. We will move on to, this is item 3B1, which is 1820 to 1826 De La Vina Street. Mr. Downey?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners, 1820 to 1826 De La Vina Street is a project that is going in to join 2 different parcels and provide housing again that will have a component of low income and some moderate income housing. The part of the project was it was important to the other review body to preserve the large oak tree, and they've altered their design in order to do that. The applicant is requesting the street trees be removed so that that oak tree can become a focal point of the project. Street Tree Advisory Committee went to the site and determined that by the way, these 2 photos, they're just from a little different perspective, but it shows 3 trees in each of the photos. It is only 3 trees that they're requesting. The tree on the far left in the photo is at the location of where the new driveway will be installed. At the far right end of the property is the existing driveway, which will be removed. The Street Tree Advisory Committee determined that the trees could coexist with the oak tree quite well, and that removing them would provide a hole in the continual pattern of trees along the street. They determined that once the other driveway is removed, there would be space to plant a new street tree at that location, So therefore, their recommendation is to approve the one tree for the driveway on the condition that they replant another tree where the existing driveway will be removed, and deny the other two.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Downey. We don't have any public comment on this item, so I'm going to open it up to the commission for questions and discussion. Mr. Casebeer?
What is the designated street tree for that portion of De La Vina Street?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Casebeer, the podocarpus that are at the site are the designated tree.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Ferrara?
Yes, Mr. Downey, the David R. Black and Associates, they mention here that they believe that the two trees will eventually, as they mature, will be in conflict with the oak tree. Do you believe that will be the case at some time in the future, or will pruning be able to keep them under control?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Ferrara, the podocarpus is a species tree that does well in part shade. The committee determined, and I concur with them, that these trees can coexist just fine under this oak.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Do I hear a motion? Or?
Sure. I move that we concur with the recommendation with the Street Tree Advisory Committee to approve the removal of one tree with replacement in the existing driveway area that will become Parkway. Is that?
I second that.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor? Oh, excuse me. Mr. Burns?
I'm quick, but not that quick. It's a very great plan, which is we're only touching on the edge, but I really like the way the plan looked, and I love that one big oak tree, and it's too bad I could see his reasoning of getting rid of these trees, but I'm going to go with the motion.
Okay.
And I would agree with you. And my only thought is that when you're walking on the sidewalk, it is nice to have that break of a tree between you and the cars, parked cars in the street. You know, it does provide something. So.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor, and we have a second to that motion, and no further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Downey. I think that completes Street Tree.
Chair Wiscombe?
Yes.
Before we continue, it might be nice to go back and do the Youth Council
Yes,
report.
I took the words right out of my mouth. Okay, so we will hear the Youth Council report. Welcome back, Diego.
Thank you. It's nice to be back. So this past Monday, the Youth Council had one of their biggest events, and it was a success. It was their Teen Rights Workshop, which they collaborated with the Westside Community Center Youth Group, along with the Future Leaders of America and the San Marcos Mosesitas group. And what they did was the attendance was about 115, and it was one of their biggest events so far. What they talked about there were certain workshops where they talked about was that teen domestic violence, drugs and alcohol, school regulations, and also police stops. And it was where adults and teen facilitators conducted the workshops. And so it was one of the greatest events, I would have to say, for the Youth Council they've done so far. So that's a good way to start out with one of their big projects. Another thing they have is that they have 2 new Youth Council members, and the Youth Council is hoping to introduce them to the commission in the December meeting. Cool. And so they were able to replace a vacant position with another teen in the target area, which is on the east side neighborhood. And so they were able to blend it out and get all the representation from both areas. Another thing that they had was they met with a teen board, with the PAL leadership group last night regarding the teen center. And there will be a report coming forth next month. And what they talked about was teen center attendance, and they said it was kind of low, but the good thing is that they have new teens coming into the center. So that should be good. And also they are looking forward to working with PAL on promoting the teen center more. And the Youth Council wants to do that as well. So, and then lastly, let's see, the youth council has been asked to co-host a teen and board exchange, which would include teens from teens from various youth councils and teen boards. And the event is scheduled for December 10th in Anaheim. And so the Youth Council is working with the Anaheim Youth Commission on the agenda, and the Santa Barbara Youth Council members are hoping to be able to attend that. And so lastly, I'll leave it with their meeting is December 6th, and that will be the last meeting for the holidays until the January meeting. So that's the report for the Youth Council.
Great, thank you. That's very thorough. The Teen Speak Out, I'm hoping that attracts, it brought that many teens into the center. I'm hoping a lot of them keep going back. And it sounds like just a great event.
Chair Wiscombe, I just wanted to add my compliments. I was at the event. Mayor Schneider was at the event. A number of people were there to see it in action, and it was very impressive. Plus, they had really nice coverage on KEYT, both at the 11 o'clock news and then the following morning. It was designed well. You had terrific engagement. The youth facilitators in the different workshop sessions were well prepared, and you could tell that the youth that were there were really learning things and finding it very engaging and rewarding. So great job by everyone. Very, very good work.
That's great. Thank you. And we certainly look forward to meeting the two new members of the Youth Council and hearing the PAL, the first report on the PAL transfer. So that'll be great.
Definitely.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Okay, that's great. Thank you, Diego. Okay, so now we are old business. We don't have any old business, so now we're on to new business. This is item number 4 on the agenda, and it's the Santa Barbara Zoo Wetland Margin Enhancement Project. That is. Could we think up a longer name?
Chair Wiscombe and commissioners, we have some new commissioners, so let me just give a little background. This project is coming to you for 2 reasons. One, it's a project that is a collaboration with the Creeks program and the zoo. And 2, the zoo is on city parkland. The city has a long-term lease with the Santa Barbara Zoo, and because it is zoned parkland, the zoo brings their development plans, and they come to an annual report to the commission. So, and the commission has, on a regular basis, done site visits so that they observe the zoo facility and observe their operations. So although we don't have anything to do with the operation of the zoo per se, it is run by a nonprofit foundation. This commission does have oversight just of the use of the land and the relationship that the city has with the zoo. So with that, the presentation tonight is by George Thompson with our Creeks program.
Thank you very much. Chair Wiscombe, Commissioners, good evening. My name is George Thompson. I work in the Creeks Division. I manage about 15 different projects for the Creeks Division, and this is a new one for me. It hasn't gone in the ground yet. We're in the middle of permitting, and luckily I didn't come up with the name of this this program, but I'll explain what the Santa Barbara Zoo Wetland Margin Enhancement Project is. Let me begin by giving you an overview of where the project is located. You can see to the right of the screen the Bird Refuge. It's one of 9 passive parks within the city. It's widely used by a lot of community members. It's seen by a lot of people that drive by. It's really a gem. But at the same time, there's portions of it that need improvement, and the Parks Division are working both on a short-term basis and on a long-term basis to develop plans for vectors, biodiversity enhancement, flooding issues, and so forth. The zoo has also been doing some work, not so much on the margin where the orange arrows are, but more on the other side of the train track, so to speak, and I'll explain what that means. They have their own little train system there. They've been doing some native plantings and working on their landscaping program to cut down on the use of pesticides, water, et cetera, and also plant a lot of native plants. And that's where the synergy between the Creeks Division and the zoo and several other nonprofits came together to develop this project. So really the focus of the project is the whole length of the zoo perimeter along the upper edge, starting up here, if you can see my little mouse there, and it comes all the way down. And it's split into 2 phases, and I'll explain why that is in a moment. Really, the focus of the project is to focus our efforts on non-native invasive plants, and I want to be clear that we're not talking about all non-native plants. We're specifically talking about the ones that either cause a loss in biodiversity in terms of birds, insects, or crowd out other native species that are becoming more and more rare in Santa Barbara. So the 3 that we're really focused on are, starting from the left, giant reed, which a lot of people mistake for bamboo. And this is really the reason that I got involved in the project, because I manage a citywide program that's really focused on getting giant reed out of all of the city creeks. We've hit every creek in the city. The bird refuge is closely associated with Sycamore Creek, but it's its own little waterway. And so I really focus on this plant because it spreads so rapidly. One piece of stem fragment can break off and be transported and grow into a whole new multi-acre habitat. Moving to the right, we've got Cape Ivy. Many of you have seen this. Douglas Family Preserve has got quite a bit of it. Toro Canyon to the east of Santa Barbara. And then the plant on the right, Myoporum, which is a common landscape plant. It's in the past 5 years or so, it's really been infected by this insect thrip, and so it's really declined in appearance. But as far as its effect on habitat, it spreads widely by birds, transported seeds around, and doesn't really produce a lot of the same resources that other shrubs such as toyon, Christmasberry would provide. So the focus of the project is to get these plants out, but then also replace them with something that's going to be beneficial, it's going to look good, and provide resources for wildlife. So here's a ground level view of giant reed, uncontrolled. I'm not sure how it got started here at this particular property, but perhaps it was planted as a landscape plant. It is sold in nurseries. And once you get it in the ground, it's extremely difficult to remove. So the plan for a site like this is to remove it down to the ground, and we really need to keep on it, treat it for probably up to 2 years. But at the same time, we can start planting within the root mass and work around the plants that are getting established. So here are the train tracks that I was talking about. This is part of the zoo's internal train system. Over 200,000 people per year ride the train and get great views of the bird refuge. So it's a great project to expose the bird refuge and the city park system to not only residents that use the zoo, but a lot of out-of-town visitors. So here are some of the natives that we'll be planting: western goldenrod, mulefat, and California rose. The great thing about these plants is that they have various flowering times throughout the year. So one of the objectives is to provide both visual resources, but also wildlife resources throughout a longer period of the year, whereas the giant reed doesn't produce flowers that are used by animals, and so replacing them with something like these species would do that. The project scope encompasses about 3.2 acres, but we split it up into phases, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. The project title refers to the wetland margin, but it's really starting at the bird refuge water edge, going all the way up through that intermediate zone where it's seasonally wet. It's really important for a whole host of different animals, frogs, some types of reptiles. Really like to use that zone where it's seasonally wet and there's a lot of resources there. And then the upland part of the project goes into basically oak woodland. There's some remnant oak woodland on the zoo property that we're going to enhance and restore. When it's all said and done, we'll install over 2,400 plants. and that encompasses 15 native species. We collect all the seed locally and grow them out in our own nursery or contract it out to 2 local nurseries. And then we're going to tap into the vast volunteer resources that our project partners have to really get some hands-on maintenance and installation. And then we're going to be using drip irrigation and manual weeding to maintain the site. So our project partners are basically our 2 main partners are Channel Islands Restoration, which does restoration, as their name suggests, on the Channel Islands, but also on the mainland. They've got a database of about 900 volunteers that they call on to do projects up and down the coast, and it's really similar work to the type of work that we're proposing for this site, removing exotic invasives and restoring them to benefit habitat and wildlife. They also have a big classroom component where they go and do public speaking in schools and that sort of thing. And then, of course, the Santa Barbara Zoo. We've worked closely with them the past several months in processing our permitting and getting the project scope lined up. And then the Southern California Wetlands Recovery Project is a state coastal conservancy organization, and they were kind enough to give Channel Islands Restoration $30,000 to help fund the project. So we're very grateful for that. And then, of course, the Creeks Division is going to be focused on that giant reed plant that I talked about earlier. So we're splitting the project into 2 phases. Phase 1 is outlined in the white squares there on the right there. You can see the aerial map. Just to orient you, for those of you not familiar with the area, Cabrillo, the beach is down here, Highway 101, and then, of course, the zoo is here. So we're really doing a phased approach for several reasons. The most obvious one is Phase 2 is not funded yet, and so we'll be seeking grant funds for those next year. But when you're doing a project like this where you really need to take out fairly substantial stands of vegetation, it's really better to phase it so that, one, the aesthetic impacts aren't as great, and people that are enjoying the views from Cabrillo can kind of ease into the transition. But also there are wildlife resources there that need to be preserved and then replaced in time with appropriate vegetation. So we're going to begin on-the-ground work in January 2010. We've just wrapped up the last phase of our permitting, and we hope to complete the project by 2012. Phase 1 will cost about $90,000, and that's split among the project partners. And a lot of that, just so you know, is volunteer and in-kind donations. And then Phase 2, like I mentioned, is currently unfunded. The plan is once Phase 1 gets in, then we start bringing out potential donors and say, hey, look what we've done. This is kind of a demonstration of what might happen for the second phase. And the ballpark estimate for that is about $100,000. So we're really relying on the zoo and Channel Islands Restoration's network of volunteers. There's an image of the train. They've got volunteers for both the installation phase, the removal of exotic invasives, and then they've got a whole separate program for doing their maintenance. And so it's really important on these projects to have a maintenance plan in effect as we go into the project. I mentioned the hands-on experience for projects like these and others that we've done in the Creeks Division. It's great to see both families come out and individuals in the community, young kids getting their hands dirty and learning about our local ecosystems and why they're important, and learning about which birds use the site. And then the last part of the project is going to be exciting because we're going to develop some permanent educational signage. I was at the zoo earlier this week, and they've got the new condor exhibit with a great vista over the bird refuge, and it'd be a perfect place to give an overview of how the bird refuge works, why it's important ecologically, and then provide some detail on the background of this project. Here's my contact information for all of you and for anybody else watching at home that would like to contact me. And then, of course, in the future we'll be doing some volunteer planting days, and we'll send flyers out and notify everybody in the community about those dates. I'd like to open it up for questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. That was really informative. This is a very exciting project, really. Really big. I don't envy you with the the grass having to come out. But Does the commission have comments and questions? Yes, Mr. Ferrara?
I have a comment and a question. Phase 1 would be starting in January 2011, correct? With the grants already in place to begin the work, January 2011 for Phase 1, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And Phase 2 is unfunded at this point.
Correct.
Now, I'm looking at what we plan on doing down the road in 2013 and 2014 with the Andre Clark Bird Refuge, water quality and habitat restoration, again at that time, funded under Measure B. Is there any way to move the funding for 2013, if it comes through, and 2014 under Measure B and up into 2012 and 2013, so you'd be able to begin Phase 2 right away using Measure B funding?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Ferrara, my understanding of the future funding for Measure B is the money that's set aside in the future is really going to try to do some problem solving on the water quality issues within the bird refuge. This project is really focused on everything outside of the water. And so the bird refuge has been studied extensively. Part of the long-term plan is compiling all of that data, coming up with a solution for a long-term fix for that area of town.
Yeah, one of my concerns, and you might be able to enlighten me and educate me on this, if we're still going to have invasive species, such as the reeds in Phase 2, which is right next to Phase 1, what's going to keep them from going back into Phase 1?
Sure. I probably should have been a little bit more clear. Phase 1, and the reason that, let me go back to this slide. The reason that we've got those small little white squares down here is in Phase 1, we're taking out all of the giant reed. And so Phase 1, we're coming in, removing all of the giant weed, which poses the biggest chance of spread both on the site and around the bird refuge and to other city creeks. So my apologies for not being clear on that.
Yeah, that clarifies it more. So I was a little concerned about doing all that work and then having to do it over again.
Absolutely.
If it got back in there. Thank
Chair
you.
Wiscombe and Commissioner Ferrara, one additional comment that I would make is that the Creeks program over the years has a long track record of grant funding, and they've been successful in that because of this kind of an approach to really demonstrate their ability to complete projects. And so I think with completing Phase 1 and demonstrating what can be done, there is grant funding out there that is appropriate and can be used. So it's really a matter of, getting Phase 1 done and at the same time beginning to lay the groundwork for Phase 2 funding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rapp.
I would just add that with the water quality issues down there, we definitely will need to deal with in 2013 if the money's funded for that. I just the other day ran across the master plan from like 15 years ago. So, this has been an ongoing issue, and I can't think of a better place to reach more people than this location. Yeah. And one of the things I am very proud of through the Creeks Division is the number of different projects that have come to be, like the golf course, down at Arroyo Burro, all those different areas so that the community is really getting a benefit throughout on the work that you're doing. And I think here the educational potential is great. I think many of us just drive by the bird refuge and don't think about it very much, but it is very important part of our waterfront community there, and great habitat. So thank you for this.
I had a couple questions, Mr. Thompson. You do have a maintenance plan in place then, is that right, for once you've implemented the Phase 1 of the project?
Yes,
Yeah.
Chair Wiscombe, we do have a maintenance plan. It's twofold. The city has a maintenance plan for the giant reed, and then the zoo and Channel Islands Restoration have committed already to 2 years of maintenance for Phase 1, and it will probably be the same for Phase 2.
Okay, and the I think the slide said 80 volunteers for an ongoing maintenance program. That's, I'm feeling like because of the success of the number of volunteers on some of the other projects there, that this isn't going to be an issue in terms of being able to get the numbers you need to maintain it.
I don't anticipate that it will. The zoo has several programs where they shunt their volunteers between working within the zoo proper as well as their exterior landscaping.
Okay, great. And do you expect wildlife diversity to increase when you've implemented, for instance, phase 1 of the project?
Absolutely, yes.
Cool. That's great to hear.
There's a whole suite of migratory birds that will utilize the plants that we put in, the seeds, the insects that are drawn to them. We're seeing it elsewhere at projects we've done. The golf course has become a major hit on the Christmas bird count that the Audubon Society does. So I anticipate that it'll have the same effect at this site.
Yeah, that goes along with Ms. Longstreet's comment about this being, a perfect spot that's so visible to so many people and so many people enjoy. So that will just make it even that much more enjoyable. So that's more exciting. And I guess my last question was, is the signage in the budget? I didn't understand that. Or is that an unbudgeted item at this point?
Chair Wiscombe,
unfunded, I should have said. Yeah.
We have funding for one sign, and so that's funded by the State Coastal Conservancy.
Great. Okay.
Both manufacture and design and installation. So
great. Cool. Okay. Yes, Mr. Burns.
One question, and it probably is going to be no, but is there any thought, or has there been thought of making some sort of hiking trail around the bird refuge? Or I'm sure other people have thought of that. So just
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Burns, I'm not really qualified to answer that question. I don't know of any, but perhaps Ms. Rapp can answer
that. Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Burns, it's actually something that the zoo director and I have discussed. There are environmental limitations and there are zoo security concerns, but we both have expressed interest in trying to figure out a way to make the bird refuge a real walkable experience. So it's been discussed. It just has some real challenges that just make it a more, not an impossible project, but a more expensive project. But it's certainly, and it's also been discussed at the Planning Commission. I remember a discussion there about the possibility of doing that. So.
Is that it? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Thompson. It was a great report.
Thank you.
And, yeah, it just really exciting project. Can't wait to see the changes. Yeah. Okay. We are moving on to item number 5, which is capital projects update and proposed FY 2012 through 2017 capital program. Ms. Zachary?
Chair Wiscombe and members of the Commission, we have a fairly detailed presentation for you. You have quite a bit of information in your packet, and what we would like to do is present some of the projects we're currently working on, a few projects that we completed, and then talk about the 6-year capital program. And I have with me today Kevin Strasberg, who is our park project technician. He's a key individual in our department working on capital projects. I think he celebrated his 5th year with the city recently. So he came to us 5 years ago, and he has grown and expanded his skills. Some of you who were on the commission a few years ago remember when that project management team shrunk as a result of budget reductions. Kevin has done nothing but step up to the plate and try to move as many projects as we can forward. We have some other people that we bring in on an as-needed basis, but I would encourage you to remember as we talk about all these different things that the staffing that we have is tiny relative to what we're trying to get done. And in some ways it's very exciting because we've managed to leverage resources and opportunities have presented themselves. And so despite the economic climate, we are able to, what I like to call, chip away at projects and get things done that benefit Santa Barbara residents and visitors. So with that, as I mentioned, we're going to review with you some selected projects. We're also going to review our proposed 6-year capital program and then specifically discuss some projects that we have identified, which we do as a staff, as a department, as ones that we'd put on the wish list for funding for the next 2 years. And right now it is still a wish list, and a lot of things could change through the budget cycle. Briefly, in recent years, the general fund sources of funding for our capital program have dwindled, and in fact we've had, as you know from the last commission meeting, lost quite a bit of funding for certain projects. Some projects have just disappeared and some have been unfunded. At the same time, we have been able to compete for and receive community development block grants, and so that those grants have allowed us to make improvements in parks and recreation facilities that fall within the census tracts where that funding is available. We've also over the years benefited from state bond funds, both per capita grant funds, if you voted for Prop 12, Prop 13, Prop 40, Prop 84, some of those funds we get on a per capita basis and some are on a competitive basis. And in recent years, we've had the opportunity to have the redevelopment agency approve funding for some of our projects, and we'll talk about those. Your staff report, attachment 1, outlines by funding source how our different projects are currently funded. We also have had some unique opportunities. There's a nonprofit foundation based in Los Angeles that had 2 donor-directed programs that we were eligible for, and Kevin will present one of those projects. Many of you know the Parma Park Trust. We would not have Parma Park as it is today without the trust. And then occasionally we do get grants from the Santa Barbara County Coastal Resources Enhancement Fund, CREF. We have a small $40,000 grant for Shoreline Park for that project. So the 2 recently completed projects we're going to review with you are renovations to the Ortega Welcome House in Ortega Park and then the kitchen remodel at the Franklin Center. At your December meeting, you will get a more detailed presentation about the project at Parma Park. Projects that are underway that we're going to review very briefly with you include park area improvements at the Westside Center. We have 5 restroom renovation projects that are either underway or in planning, and that's one of the outcomes of the economy is we've had the opportunities, well, let's go in and renovate some of these very old facilities and improve them. If you've been to the Cabrillo Bathhouse restrooms recently, those were upgraded about 1.5 years ago, and light years ahead. So we're doing neat things like that. Chase Palm Park lighting, and then worked for Mesa Lane Steps and the Shoreline Park safety improvements. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Strasburg, who's going to walk you through some of these improvement projects that he's working on.
Thank you. Chair Westcomb and Commissioners, thank you very much for letting me do this presentation. We've got the Welcome House interior improvements, which were funded by community development block grants. The main portion of the project was to add lighting and greater access to the interior. So for that, we added 4 windows to the back, and we added a double door with new windows to it. Additionally, on the interior, we upgraded the kitchen facility. We added new flooring, replacing the worn-out flooring, remodeled the bathrooms, and added a trash enclosure, which you'll see on the next slide. This facility is a rental facility for the community, so it received these funds to help improve so they would have a nice place to rent out, and also it can be used for meetings. The exterior House improvements was a California Community Foundation grant fund, and with that project, we added a shade structure to the exterior. We also removed the planters that had some water intrusion problems. We did irrigate and plant them once we lowered them. The front of the building also received some new bollards, and the basketball hoops were upgraded, and we also did some steel nosing around the amphitheater to protect it from the skateboard damage that was occurring. The Franklin Kitchen remodel was also a community development block grant that happened in the Franklin Community Center. The original kitchen was very small and was probably put in the early 80s and really needed an upgrade. And behind the kitchen were 2 bathrooms that were very tiny and a small hallway. So we removed the walls and enlarged, basically tripled the kitchen size, and added, as you can see, all commercial equipment in there. That was the plan, was to get it as close to commercial as possible. The funding didn't allow us to take it completely to commercial, and you can see that it's all stainless interior now. It has a anti-slip proof floor. As part of the project, we also expanded the storage closet to allow for easier access for the chairs by adding a double door, and behind that would be a dry storage for the kitchen. The next project is underway, and it's the West Side project that the redevelopment agency is funding. The project has new flat work going in, concrete around the playground that was replaced 2 years ago. Also, 4 new benches. We replaced the handball court, which was big for the community. That was one of the main things they wanted done. Also, we've removed a bunch of overgrown eucalyptus trees that were between the sound wall and the playground and replaced them with some nice canopy trees. They're not shown in that photo because it's still underway. They actually went in the ground today. One of the other projects that are underway are the Oak Park main restroom remodel. There's 3 facilities in this building. One is a unisex, the other is men's and women's restroom. You can see how lovely the interior is now. And there's a photo of the exterior building there. And below that, you can see the bathhouse photo that was remodeled last year. It also was in lovely condition. And then next to that is an after photo showing the new tile design, and it has an epoxy floor coating in there as well that really should be durable and last a long time. And then adjacent to that would be the Stevens Park restroom photo that we did about 5 years ago with the stainless steel partitions that we're going to start making that the standard. It's a nice swirl pattern on there. I'm going to go back once. I think I didn't mention that was funded with general fund and Prop 40 funding. Also, the Ortega Park restroom, that is the next restroom in line, and you can see it is also a lovely interior. It's about 20 years old, and we will be removing the walls, on the concrete block walls, to add more visual security in there so that you can actually send a kid in there without losing their visibility of where they are in the bathroom. Additionally, we'll be changing out the roof, and there's a little shade structure in front that we'll be replacing. This was also a community development block grant, and I believe the funding for this is about $200,000. In addition to that restroom, Jill pointed out we're doing 5. There's 3 more in the future. RDA will be funding these projects as part of our restroom renovation program. RDA has funded these with, I think, a little over $500,000 to do these improvements. And I've only shown one example of the interior of the restrooms. Once again, they've got block walls in there that we're going to remove and add new partitions to, and upgrade the interiors as well to match the bathhouse. Once again, making a standard throughout the city. The next project would be at Chase Palm Park, and it's the electrical upgrade, also funded by the redevelopment agency. We're just getting underway on that project. The park is only 12 years old, but the lighting has suffered from the salt air and also being in conflict with the irrigation, and they're really falling apart. I'd say a third of the 50 fixtures out there are not working currently. That's the upright fixtures. Everything on the ground, I would say probably 1 to 2% remaining is working. So that project will replace all the poles and upgrade the stage area at the pavilion to allow ample power for the events over there. Right, currently they have 20 amps, basically one outlet's worth for the entire pavilion, and so we'll be upgrading that to probably close to 100 amps and putting in a little sub-panel for that. And I'll hand this back to Jill. She's going to continue and talk about the Mesa Lane Steps project. Thank you.
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners, 2 more projects to review briefly with you. The Mesa Lane Steps are at the end of Mesa Lane, as you can imagine. They were constructed in 1982, originally constructed entirely of wood. What the steps did is they replaced an informal trail access that people were using to get to the beach. So it was a good idea to put steps in. Unfortunately, as a result of storms and wave action, on a couple of occasions we've had deterioration of the steps. In the early 90s, we actually went in and put that large concrete block that you see in the photo, and then also the concrete steps that lead down to the beach. The photo shows that we have some fairly significant deterioration at the lower flight of the steps. This has been a key project in our capital program for at least 3 to 4 years. We have enough funding for this project, and it is funded through the general fund to get us entirely through, or we believe to get us entirely through, project design and permitting. So it will put us in a really good position to seek grant funds to actually construct the project. We currently are finalizing the selection of the engineering consultant that will do the preliminary design, and we have a part-time project manager who worked for the city as a planner leading this project. So it's our hope and plan that she'll be able to take it through permitting for us too, and we'll be in a position to apply for grant funds probably late spring, early summer, and the permitting would be complete by 2012, and all the design would be complete. So it'll still be a couple of years before we actually might construct it, since we do need to find grant funds to do that. We anticipate the cost of the project could be as much as $600,000. There's more details. At some point in the future, as we have a design, we'll bring that back to the Commission, and you can sort of learn more about what we're proposing to do there. Shoreline Park, one of our near and dear community parks, well loved by many people in Santa Barbara and many visitors, was constructed in 1967. It's a coastal bluff park. Over the years, on average, if you look back through the records, every 10 years we've had some coastal bluff erosion there as a result of the geology and location. A couple of years ago, we had a slide that took out a portion of a sidewalk and some fencing, and that's shown in the photo in sort of the upper left. And then we also discovered through a geology analysis that we have some concern about McGilvery Point, which is an outlook area, and the potential for that to fail in the future. So the project involves basically safety improvements, and it's largely because we don't have a lot of funding to move forward with the project, but then also some park upgrades. As you will notice in the bottom left, there's a photo of the current lighting at the park. It's the original lighting, we believe, so as you can imagine, it's time for it to be replaced. The fencing in places needs to be replaced. In some cases, we want to install new fencing. This photo shows where we want to reconnect the sidewalk and then place a new fencing. We're also proposing to do some native landscaping here. And one of our long-range plans for Shoreline Park is to look at re-landscaping with natives that are more appropriate for the coastal environment. That's a longer-range plan when funding becomes available. And this gives you a sense of the new lighting. It's city standard. You've seen these going in all over town, and they create a nice light, down light. We anticipate that the area residents will be pleased with those. We also have some signage at Shoreline Park if you ever go to the Whale Tail. So we're working with Channel Islands Marine Sanctuary to upgrade and replace the signage as part of the project. Right now we're sort of about to submit the project for permitting, and we're working through some coastal geology issues with the planning division. So you'll receive more information on that project as it moves forward.
Just on the lighting, I drove home on Ortega last night, and I've got to say the new lighting that's being installed is so much friendlier. You can see pedestrians. I'm so happy to see that you're doing that. It really, makes a huge difference.
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Longstreet, I'd also add that there's a significant effort within the city to convert our lights to the most energy efficient ones as well. LED lighting is now very commercially available. That's what we'll be looking at putting in at Chase Palm Park. Wherever we can do that. And so in addition to good quality light and new lights, the cost to actually light places should be more cost effective as well. If the commission is okay, we'll continue right through the whole presentation and then come back if you have specific questions for Kevin. What I'd like to turn to now is a presentation on the proposed capital improvement program for 2012 to 2017. It's a 6-year program. It's prepared during the annual budget cycle. Because we've been doing one-year budgets, we keep doing this year after year. It outlines a variety of things. You have in your packet draft pages of all the different projects that we would project the department would need in the future, projects that we currently have planned and may or may not have funding for. And the funding is allocated on an annual basis. All departments prepare CIP. We're part of a large effort. For Parks and Recreation, we have 37 projects, as you can imagine, and the summary sheet wasn't available when this was put together for you, but it's on the order of over $60 million if you added it all up. Our projects are organized under our department, but we also have projects organized under the Neighborhood Improvement Program. And they are projects within parks, and they are park or recreation facility related, but they're part of the citywide Neighborhood Improvement Program where we're looking specifically at how to make improvements neighborhood by neighborhood. So even though they're located under a different program name, they are something that we would do for the department. In fiscal year 2012 and 13, and those are essentially the first 2 years of the 6-year program where we're kind of sure that if we had the funding, we would move forward, and we've developed cost estimates that we believe are reasonable for the projects. So you will notice, and I combined the numbers, in fiscal year 2012, we have a wish list of over $800,000. In fiscal year 2013, one that's closer to $2 million. And the assumption is all that funding would come from a variety of sources if it was available. The project selection process occurs through a variety of ways. We get feedback on a regular basis from members of the community on what they're interested in. We identify needs based on we might have a facility that desperately needs upgrading through discussions, meetings, comments from the commissioners. Projects become more and less important in terms of priority. We had the Infrastructure Financing Task Force that came up with a series of recommendations for projects, so that helps come up with prioritizing our projects. Sometimes it's opportunity driven, as you can imagine, and so we want to be able to take advantage of opportunities. Feasibility helps a lot, funding potential, and then you'll see over time that there's a multi-year schedule and multi-year funding schedule. So with this presentation, we will focus really on what we're looking at for 2012-2013. We'll not go into great depth on all the projects that you have in the packet. Certainly be happy to answer any questions you might have. But these are the projects, and I'll go through some of them quite quickly to give you a sense of what the objectives are behind the projects. And they range from down at the beach. They include playgrounds. We talked about Mesa Lane. A couple of years ago, we decided, in addition to having our playground replacement program, where we consistently looked at replacing the 22 playgrounds that we have in our parks, we needed to get on a park restroom renovation program. And what you'll notice as we go through this is a lot of what we're doing is replacing and renovating and upgrading. We're not really in the business of developing new. We do have new projects in our capital program, but in the next couple of years, we're really looking more at that. Cabrillo Ball Fields, as you know, is an area that's received a lot of attention over the years because of the way it is currently used. We have a small amount of funding through Community Development Block Grant to fence the restroom, dugout, and the bleacher area so that we can maintain those areas for their specific use when the ball field is being used. As part of a larger effort of looking at the ball field and how to improve its use and improve community use of it, perhaps discourage some of the activities that occur there, we've come up with a series of improvements that, if funded, we would love to pursue. And they're in 3 different projects in the capital program because as Kevin indicated with the Ortega Welcome House, sometimes we do part of it, and then we come back another year and do another part of it. But we have the grand plan for the whole park, and it might take a couple of different projects to get it done. So with this, our proposal includes looking at replacing the landscaping, upgrading the landscaping, looking at the lighting. We have a serious drainage problem at the eastern end of the park, which renders it fairly unusable. So if we wanted to expand community use of the park, we need to deal with that drainage, extend the storm drain so that it becomes more usable and is easier to manage. We are looking at the potential for fencing the ball field area of the park, which isn't the entire park, similar to what you might see at Dwight Murphy. And what you do see at Dwight Murphy, and what you also do see at Pershing Park. We have places where we have delineated the active ball field use, but there are other uses within the park as well. And at the eastern end, one of the things that we've been doing lately is meeting with different stakeholders and beginning a discussion of what other uses could there be at this park. And this is something that we would bring back to the Commission for a more in-depth discussion in the future. So just give you a sense of that. Cabrillo Bathhouse renovation. Commissioner Burns is familiar with this. Ms. Rapp's been involved with this. I think just about everybody who's ever been involved in the Commission has looked at this facility and going, gosh, what can we do there to renovate it and turn it into a recreational facility for the 22nd, 23rd, the next couple of centuries. The bathhouse was constructed in 1930. It's always been a key recreational facility for the beach. It's not used as efficiently as it could be due to the way it's currently laid out. And the project is as conceived, and I would say, in addition to the Infrastructure Financing Task Force looking at it, there's also a core group of city staff that did, and the Commission had a presentation about their ideas. Renovate the building, look at ways to reorganize the interior, looking at things like ventilation and windows and that kind of thing. We do have $250,000 of redevelopment agency funding to begin evaluating the existing, do a thorough evaluation of the existing building, and then an analysis of the public need, programming opportunities that will set the stage for moving forward for a larger project. Chase Palm Park renovation, when we conceived of all the things we felt Chase Palm Park needed, we received RDA, Redevelopment Agency funding for the lights and the electrical updates. There are a lot of other things that the park needs, even though it's only 12 years old, because of its location, because of the use that it has. We have signage that needs to be replaced. We have a wonderful pond that has circulation equipment that needs to be replaced. We have a sail structure that needs to be upgraded. There's just lots of things, because it's such a well-loved park, that need to happen. And so we've put in our capital program our desire to undertake those things, because it is a popular park. It's a great asset to the city. Kids World is another example of a project that's well loved, was built by the community, was built with community support, has been around for almost 20 years. We generally replace our playgrounds on a 10-year replacement cycle, and that is driven in part by playground safety standards. So all our playgrounds are inspected on a daily basis, and we might remove equipment or change equipment to meet standards. And then there comes a point where we really need to either replace it or do some sort of upgrade. This project was in our capital program and was one of the projects that was eliminated 2 years ago. We are putting it back in and requesting a small amount of funding. I think it's $25,000 in the first year and $35,000 in the second year to initiate at least the technical analysis of how to rebuild it as it currently is, or make slight improvements, not do a whole-scale redo of Kids World. We had a series of meetings with stakeholders that sort of said, you know, it's not broken, it just might need some tweaking, with the idea that if we can get that base level work done, we may be able to find outside sources of funds to actually make those improvements. We don't want to get to the day where we realize we've waited too long with Kids World. So that's why it's in our proposed capital program. I mentioned our playground replacement program. Every year we replace playgrounds as funding is available. Last year we did not have any funding from the general fund, but we had a community development block grant, so we replaced the playground at Eastside Neighborhood Park. Our proposal is to replace the Chase Palm Park playground next year. It too is 12 years old. We lost a portion of it when a tree fell, and as a well-loved playground, there are elements that we could put in and upgrade. A slightly higher cost perhaps than other ones, because as you can tell, it's a very unique playground, and we'd want to be able to consider that. Just so the Commission is aware, in fiscal year 11 this year, we're replacing the playgrounds at Hilderay Park and Hidden Valley Park. So those are underway and should be done in the early part of 2011. And then lastly, briefly, the neighborhood improvement projects. I mentioned the Cabrillo Ballfield perimeter fence and mow strips as part of the earlier presentation. We've also identified the need to upgrade and replace the lighting at Ortega Park. And with that and everything else that we've done there, we will have spent more than $1 million in Ortega Park over the last 5 years. We still have the pool facility to address at some point in the future, but we will have done quite a bit to improve that park for the East Side neighborhood. And then with the Neighborhood Advisory Council, there's the initiation of that. There's a proposal to develop a neighborhood preservation program where there's specific projects identified in each neighborhood. It's loosely defined. It would get developed over time. And then park and facility security enhancements. That's one of the things that we've had to really address over the last number of years. In some cases, cameras have been installed. In other cases, it's been lighting. Looking at how to make our parks and facilities safer for the people that are using them, and keep them open. These projects we apply for funding through the Community Development Block Grant Program. The city has other projects that are funded through that program, sidewalk improvement projects, lighting projects. So we work with the Public Works Department, the Community Development Department, all to sit around and say, okay, here's the range of projects that have interest. And the community neighborhood groups weigh in on these projects too and give us their priorities. What do we want to apply for? And then it goes through the application review process, and ultimately council approves them. So in summary, just to go over how the capital program goes from ideas to adoption. The capital program is finalized and presented to council I believe it'll be presented in February or March of next year. The Parks and Recreation Commission every year has the opportunity to make recommendations on capital projects. And by the time we present this to you in May, we'll have a better sense of what kind of funding might be available for these projects. And then, as I indicated, funding's allocated as available and prioritized based on a variety of factors. From our standpoint, we would appreciate Commission discussion of the projects, any other thoughts that you have on our capital program, so that we can take that into consideration as we finalize our work on this. And that concludes my presentation.
Chair Wiscombe, prior to the Commission beginning discussion or asking questions, I'd just like to make some general comments. For many years, the department had a very difficult time getting projects completed. And we have really made an effort over recent years to change that. And I am very proud of the work of our staff, and that includes Ms. Zachary and Mr. Strasberg and others that have been involved in really moving these projects forward. Because we have such a challenge with our parks and our recreation facilities because they are old. And many of them are outdated, meaning that they don't meet current ADA standards, or they're crumbling and falling apart, or they're frankly just not visually appealing, or they're not a good neighbor. You know, all of our neighbors that surround our parks put efforts into maintaining their homes, and sometimes our parks don't look as well kept. And so that is really, I think, for the Commission, something that we really need to continue to be focused on, because we are the stewards for all of these parks and facilities for the future. And I have to say, even with the reduction in general fund support for the capital program for parks and recreation, we have done a tremendous job checking under every rock for grant funds. We've had City Council support for using RDA funds to address the deferred maintenance in parks and recreation facilities. Similarly for CDBG, where it's in the appropriate community development block grant area, designated areas. So I think we've done a very good job being creative about the funding. But as Ms. Zachary referred to the capital program, it really is a wish list. I mean, it's twofold. One, we're identifying really what needs to be done. And by having it in the capital program, it positions us to take advantage of opportunities, also, as Ms. Zachary said. Because basically, for some grants, if it's not in your capital program, you don't qualify. And it also keeps us focused on what are the priorities. So I would ask that as the Commission looks at this, to look at the priorities. You know, this is what staff is putting out there, what we're saying, kind of based on what we think maybe some funding opportunities might be, but also for what we see as the priorities. And some of those priorities go up or down. The Cabrillo Ball Field wasn't a priority for many years, but now that is a big community priority. And so it's appropriate that we're looking at that and moving it up on the priority list. So just as you're looking at it, I think it's to look at what's there, maybe what's not, and ask any questions that you have, to maybe look at the priorities and, make sure you understand what the thinking is behind those priorities. And I think also, and this is the frustration, oftentimes people look at the city's capital improvement program as a funding plan. It's not funded. It's really more of, if we had the money, this is what we would do when. So those are just a few things to kind of keep in mind. But I do have to say, I think we have a very great challenge because we have that responsibility for future generations to maintain our parks and facilities so they are viable for those future generations, and that we also are good neighbors and contributing to the property values that our communities have, and so it's all those different pieces. So it's what kind of recreation activities we may be looking at, maybe some reuse, as we were talking about the Cabrillo Ball Field, or there may be some reuse opportunities, changing trends. We haven't had a lot of opportunity to look at that because we've been more focused on just deferred maintenance of what we have and trying to just get the basics done. But those are just some additional thoughts to put out there, and I again want to just acknowledge the tremendous efforts of our project management team under Ms. Zachary's guidance and leadership. We've done a tremendous job in improving parks and facilities for the community. I am sometimes just amazed at what we've been able to do. And I think the improvements that we've made have just been beautiful. When you walk through these facilities, I think, they're good for another 50 years, which is great. So with that, any questions that you have?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Rapp. I think I speak for the whole commission when echoing your comment. Ms. Zachary, thank you so much for all the hard work you've done. And Mr. Strasburg, it is truly amazing in the budget times that we're having what this department has accomplished. And it's really remarkable, and you're all to be commended for it. It's really great. I did a quick calculation when I was looking through the packet this afternoon, and FY 2011, difficult year, 21% from the general fund, 33% from grants, and 46% from RDA. You are to be commended on that. That is 1/3 from grants. That's a lot of hard work and effort to put that together, and it's not easy to put together a grant application. It takes time and it takes effort, and you want it to be right, and if you want the money, it does. It's a time-consuming process. So I think it's really amazing that we're able to do these things in these really tough times. I'm just throwing this out there for priorities. Ms. Longstreet said when we were working on the budget a long time ago, clean, green, and safe.
Staff quote.
Okay, I think that the projects that you're looking at a lot of them are clean, green, and safe. The Cabrillo Ball Field getting moved up, I think that's, that kind of goes into the safety issue, and, I think it's great that, perhaps there'll be maybe other uses for that space someday too, I think. And I also think that prioritizing projects where there are potential revenue increases through upgrades, Cabrillo Bathhouse. That, I think that's a really good focus, because we're all about increasing revenue too. We are in some ways a business. So those are two priorities, I guess, that I'd throw out there when you're looking at the projects that you put forth. And I'll get off the bandwagon now and move it on for Ms.
Well, yeah, I have a frustration. Funny. And it's something that I really think council needs to address. And that is that our staff in Parks and Recreation are the experts in maintaining our facilities and knowing what we can and cannot maintain. And with some of the projects, as they make their way through design review, I think that I would like to send a strong message to the design review boards and to the council that they need to start paying attention to the budgetary restrictions that we have and the fact that it is a waste of tax dollars to install some of the things we do install that could be better focused on the maintenance of what we have, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And that my frustration is we sit here cutting pennies, watching, all of these projects, kind of idly sit by, and then the Cabrillo sidewalks is an example to me where we may put in through a different funding mechanism some landscape that we don't have any capacity to maintain. You will do your best. I'm not saying you're going to walk away from it. But I would like to see us have a more comprehensive view as a city on what we're doing. We should, not our commission sitting here reviewing one way and saying, here's the cuts we're taking, here's the limited time and resources that we have, and then building something that we can't maintain from the get-go. So that's just an item I would like to throw out. I don't know how we begin to address this with council, what direction comes down. I know each one of those boards and commissions are doing their job as their purview says, but we have to start a better team process to me. So.
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Longstreet, I think your comments tonight are in the appropriate place. We will be taking a summary of the Park and Recreation Commission comments and forwarding them with comments from other boards and commissions, first to the Planning Commission and then to City Council. So this is the appropriate place to have those comments, and they will be forwarded in that way.
And I would go say them at any one of those venues.
Okay. Mr. Ferrara?
Thank you, Chair Wiscombe. There's a couple items I'd like to touch on, and I do want to commend you guys. You're doing a fantastic job. I had the ability. I was lucky enough to go with you to the see the lighting and all at the park there, and there's a lot that needs to be done there, and you guys really hit. It was just like you hit everything, and I thought it was really great. I was really enlightened about the whole thing. But one thing I'm really concerned about, and I'd like to see it happen sooner than later, is the acquisition of a Lower West Side Center. We've been putting a lot, and definitely needed, into the Franklin and West Side Community Center. But I don't know, it seems as though the Lower West Side is, how do I say this, needs to be put up there at the top of the list now, because we have a lot of folks, a large population over there that definitely need to have a center and a place to go. Also, lighting in the parks is very, very important, because as we went through the parks, anybody could be lurking in those parks at night ready to, it's really, security is a very big issue. And I think with the lights that we're going to get at Chase Palm Park, they're going to work very, very well and give us a lot more light on the area there. And also, I'm wondering about the fencing that's going to go around with the CDBG block grant, the $25,000. Is that going to contain the restroom and the bleachers? Is that what it's meant to do? And I guess it's meant to keep some people out at certain times, to keep it safe and secure in that area and reduce any criminal activity and that sort of thing. Am I correct on that?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Farrar, that's correct. The purpose of the fencing is limited just to the restroom around the bleachers, the backstop area, essentially to make it a safer place, to address some of the maintenance issues, because maintenance there can be high, even though the ball field's not being used as a ball field, and allow us to allocate our resources more appropriately based on needs throughout our park system. So when we make a recommendation in one area, we're also thinking about the bigger picture for our facilities, where our resources need to go.
I think that once we get that in place, that fencing it'll attract more people to want to use that park for the purposes it was designed for originally. And I'm very happy with that. I suppose that that fencing will remain in place if and when the funding sources become available to complete the renovation of the ball field. So, and another question on the Mesa Lane steps. What is the erosion on the cliff sides around those steps? Is it safe enough to put that investment into it and know that we're not going to have any erosion that's going to close those steps in the near future?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Farrar, that's an excellent question. One of the first things that we will do as part of the preliminary design process is have a coastal engineering report prepared, and the engineers involved in the project will be looking at the surrounding area around the steps. That said, what we will be building the steps to survive is at least 50 years of coastal erosion, regardless of what happens around the steps. And it's a fine balance between providing coastal access and understanding that in an area where you have coastal bluff erosion, nothing's forever. However, we will have a good sense of what's going on there as part of the project.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Casebeer.
Yes. Just for my own education, and I think it might help all of us, sources of funding. If you could give us a couple minutes of, we know, general fund comes from the basic city budget, but CDBG, RDA, Prop 40 was mentioned. And where I'm going with this is, what kind of flexibility do we have? How do we go after these funds?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Casebeer, the Community Development Block Grant funding comes from Department of Housing and Urban Development. So it's a federal program, and it's allocated to the city on an annual basis based on the population in certain census tracts, so more low-income census tracts. The city has a program that allocates how those funds get spent. So it doesn't just get spent within the city departments. It goes out for community services grants as well. That comes annually. We find out annually how much money they think they might get, and then we apply, and the money becomes available the following year. So we generally will look at projects in those census tracts. We'll look to CDBG funding and see, can we apply under that? Sometimes we'll match it a little bit. For example, at Ortega Welcome House, we had about $15,000 in general fund that we put towards the project as well, and that allowed us to have Kevin manage the project, because one of the things about some of the grant funds is they'll pay for stuff or they'll pay for construction, but they won't pay for the people that have to manage the project. And so we need to make sure we have the funding for the people to manage the project. The bond money, we had a wonderful time there in the early, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, where voters approved all these bond acts, and so money was allocated. After a bond act is passed, then the legislature sort of decides ultimately where it's going to go. We don't see there being any more bond money for a long time. In fact, the restroom at Oak Park is the last bond act money. That said, we do get to fix the Oak Park wading pool with a little bit of bond. So we've managed to nickel and dime our way through a lot of projects with that funding.
Would that be Prop 40?
In this case, it was Prop 40. Okay. Yes, and each proposition release different amounts of funding. A lot of the funding we spent, funding we used for Ortega field improvements was Bond Act money. We made improvements up at Franceschi House. The parking area and the driveway was Bond Act money. Sometimes things are very opportunistic, and that's one of the ways we try to prioritize projects as well. Commissioner Farrar was talking about the Lower West Side Center. Even though it might not show up in funding in 2012 or 13, if an opportunity jumped at us, we would be all over it and take advantage of it. Mostly it's not there because we really can't conceive of where the money might come from in the next 2 years. But if it did show up or an opportunity, we would try to find a way to make it happen. The Parma Park Trust, as I mentioned, is very unique in terms of dedicated for that park. There are other grant sources that are actually federally sourced, like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is for parks and recreation facilities, the Habitat Conservation Fund, and we've gotten funding for creeks projects from that fund. Not a lot of money, so it's fairly competitive. And the challenge there is you need to have all your permits and environmental documentation in place before you can apply for it. So that's why we sort of try to get that far along. Mesa Lane Steps, we have hope that there could be funding through coastal sources, Coastal Conservancy. We do occasionally get grants from the County Coastal Resources Enhancement Fund. That's highly competitive too. But it's a project that fits right within their criteria. Whenever we see something new come across, we see how it might fit with what we have. So that's kind of where we are. We don't have super high hopes for lots of extra money out there, but sometimes things do sort of jump out at us. We did indirectly get ARA funding, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funding. We replaced roofs on facilities with that, and it was perfect. So it's like, okay, we have a little bit here, we'll do it like that. So Oh, and RDA, I'm sorry, I forgot. The redevelopment agency, funding for the redevelopment agency is tax increment funding from the businesses' properties within the redevelopment agency zone. So there's a zone, and it is focused on very specific purposes, alleviating blight and areas that need improvement. It will sunset in a matter of years, so that funding will go away. And there are many different things that the city looks at for RDA improvements. We're very fortunate recently to be the beneficiaries. And the bottom of your table here notes the Carrillo Recreation Center remodel and seismic upgrades is a $6 million RDA funded project, and that's going to be done, I think, in March. And the Commission will hear more about that fairly soon. And that's just fantastic. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yes.
And,
thank you.
And Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Casebear, I would add that we will probably be encouraging the Commission to speak at meetings where discussions about future RDA funding for various projects in the city is being discussed, because there are limited opportunities for these future funds, and there's a lot of competition. The Cabrillo Bathhouse is one of the projects that's kind of planned right now, but there may be other discussions that are coming up. So that will be one of that is one of those good funding sources for us that we really want to try and utilize to protect the community park and recreation facilities for the future. But that is still a very political discussion that is yet to be had.
Okay. Mr. Burns?
Good, thank you. A couple of just comments that hopefully will make sense. The infrastructure task force, which I was on for about a year, I'm wondering if we might, at one of our next meetings, actually kind of look at the recommendations that were made a few years ago, and what's the status of the recommendations? As I bring that up, I'm also, Frank Skipper was one of the members, and he had brought up that at the Kids World, which we're looking at funding some work on it, he thought that the high school students in their technical programs might be able to do some work there, and that might be a way to save us some money. Another kind of off-the-wall comment is earlier today we looked at 2 different housing projects. I don't believe the city has a policy in place for what sort of recreation funds or park funds should come from housing projects, and possibly we should look to see, should we have something like that in place? It's kind of not what we generally think about, but we're looking at these projects, and I don't see anything that says a little bit should come to the park department. And something that's kind of off in left field also, as usual. A couple days ago, the city at the airport, they were talking about that Deckers might be moving into one of the spaces out there, and they're looking at, leasing out some of the space. And yesterday I was reading an article on a company that's lowering the amount of buildings they're leasing by renovating and using the space in the existing buildings. And I'm just saying that possibly if the city might be having less people and employees, we might look at if there's buildings that we might not need, and figure out a way that we can, if we don't use them, lease them to someone else. Last year, two things that happened that were still good for the community that we are no longer directly responsible for is the tennis court, which I think Ellings Park is now handling, which is an expense that we don't have to spend anymore on. And right now with PALS, they're doing the teen center. So we might also look at the next budget cycle, if we're going to not have as much money as we have right now. Are there buildings that we might lease out to someone else? And how it came in with my other thoughts were, and then see if we can be more efficient in using less space, and that would just, cut our costs. Any questions?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Burns, thank you for mentioning the Infrastructure Financing Task Force report. Actually, earlier today, I was in a discussion with the Assistant Administrator and the Public Works Director, and we were talking about the importance of bringing that report back for more discussion. It kind of got put on the sidelines as the city was responding to the tremendous economic crisis that we had. But I think we're really at the place where we need to be talking about the recommendations in that report. And we did talk about one of the first places to start would be to, just develop a report on what has been done in the interim, because there has been some progress on some things. So thank you. We will do that. And I do think that it's something that this commission should continue to be involved in. New commissioners, remind me whether we gave you a copy of that report. Okay, so we'll try to do that as well, because as we talked about in our budget, the Parks and Recreation Department manages about half of the city's facilities. And so when we talk about the funding of infrastructure, a big part of that is Parks and Recreation in the general fund. The second thing is the comment on development fees related to supporting Parks and Recreation Facilities. Actually, that was a recommendation that the Parks and Recreation Commission made to the Planning Commission, that it be included in Plan Santa Barbara. And so there are comments in there already about that should be a future direction, and that the city should explore those opportunities. We don't currently do that. So that's a funding source that the city should be looking at.
And a lot of cities do that.
Yes.
A lot of good quality open space or quality dollars to create open space and links between neighborhoods, new neighborhoods, et cetera, come from money from developers with cities that do have those regulations.
And one of the things that the Planning Commission asked for from the Park and Recreation Commission is that, in the future, sometime in the near future, that we actually provide them with some guidelines of what would that mean, what kind of facilities, what kind of programs. In other words, they're on the planning end, and they are asking us for, some recommendations based on what we understand the current inventory of programs and services to be. So that's a next step in the planning process, but it is something that the Planning Commission asked the Park and Recreation Commission to focus on, to help them do their job.
Be a very exciting step.
Chair Wiscombe, I have a question. Where do we stand at this particular time on Franceschi House? Sorry, I have to do it. It's like the elephant in the room a lot of the time, but I think we need to put that back. I mean, we need to have some resolution. Probably the only one that needs resolution up here, but...
Well, I think, first off, just to share with commissioners who are new, this is a project that the city has undertaken with the Pearl Chase Society. The Pearl Chase Society took on a commitment to fundraise for the rehabilitation of Franceschi House. Difficult fundraising climate, and the project has really stalled in spite of best expectations. And so the city is, there are some pretty significant cost-wise improvements that the city would be obligated to put in place in order for the rehabilitation of the house to go forward. There is no funding for those required improvements, and nor is it likely to be a funding priority with all of the other park and recreation facility needs. So we have a conundrum. So the city is, in fact, looking at what are the next steps, and the Pearl Chase Society acknowledges that this is a very difficult fundraising environment for a project like this. So today, it's still under discussion, and I think all parties are a little frustrated.
Okay, I will agree to frustrated. Mr. Burns?
Just a week or so ago, in Summerlin, they were talking of putting in some rental units at one of the parks. And I don't think we've got anything going on at Franceschi House, but does it make sense is it feasible to turn that building into a rental? I mean, it seems like it almost needs just to be torn down, but I don't think nobody wants to tear it down.
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Burns, it's a little bit broader discussion. And also there was an article on county parks and, having park hosts or the park hosts that are allowed to live in the park for 6 months and things like that. So There are a number of alternatives that work in some parks which are more rural in nature. The specific question of whether the Franceschi House could be a rental, we have some covenants that are based on how the house was deeded to the city that limit what we can do. We do actually have, separate from the Franceschi House, we do actually have a park, we do have a house on the property that houses one of our park staff. And I guess to the broader question, you know, could we have some kind of a program where we have rental property on our parks? I really think it's a broader discussion on a park-by-park basis and a difficult legal one in terms of both what's allowed on parkland and the use of funds and all that. So it's worth probably having, but there are some limitations we'd need to work around.
Okay, thank you. I just had Mr. Ferrara brought up lighting in the parks, and I just had a couple other comments. The park facility security enhancements. I think that, and we've got, it was $50,000 a year. I think that's a really, really important program to keep and hopefully to get funded, because I think that does address some of these, can begin to address in various parks and public spaces the needs, the security improvements that are needed. The other comment is, one of the items is the neighborhood preservation program, and Ms. Zachary touched on that with the newly formed Neighborhood Advisory Council and building and safety. And I think that is another priority item in terms of hopefully getting funded and getting underway, particularly because this council is so, the advisory council will be so new. And I think it's a great way to kind of get off the ground and running. And I think we talked about clean, green, and safe, and we talked about improvements that may increase revenue, which are you thinking that those are the types of, that's the type of information you want from us at this point? Have we given you...
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners, yes, your comments are very helpful, and as Ms. Rapp indicated, will fold into the ongoing discussions for the capital improvement program, and as it goes through the process. I think, you know, we share those priorities as well, as how do we improve what we have, make it safer, and then support our projects and programs through revenue so that we can continue to provide these facilities for people to enjoy, whether they're residents or visitors. So, no,
Great.
they're very helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Rapp, Ms. Zachary, Mr. Strasburg, you all just did a great job. And thanks to Mr. Escobar, too, who is out there with his staff every day, keeping these things clean, green, and safe. That's great. So I have, I think, one announcement, and that's that the next regular meeting of the commission is on Wednesday, December 15th, 2010 at 4 p.m. That's, you know, a change. November and December are changes. And
I second the motion.
I didn't hear a motion, so. Huh? Is there a motion?
I move we adjourn.
I second.
Any discussion?